Joining us on Empty the Bench now, an award-winning journalist over at NBC LA, covering all the LA teams, the Dodgers, the Rams, the Lakers, Michael Duarte. Michael, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Speaking of empty the bench, like I'm the last guy off the bench ready to come in and pinch hit. So I love the name of your podcast, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate it.
So, as somebody who is covering the Dodgers, obviously you've been following and covering this whole Trevor Bauer story, and there was a ruling that came in just the other day about the restraining order, which was obviously denied. A little bit of weird language used when we were looking over the judge's ruling. What did you make of it?
Yeah, it was a very interesting. The whole hearing was interesting. This whole saga beginning at the end of June, when we first got wind of the restraining order ex parte even being filed in court and then granted, which TMZ broke that story originally. It was just shocking because, Trevor Bauer, I think it just pitched like the day before. We had interviewed him. He had asked us, he had asked us why we hadn't asked him about Angel Hernandez catching him behind the plate that game and his balls and strikes in the strike zone. So to suddenly shift that into a potential criminal investigation, into potential sexual assault, into potential rape, into potential other things was just unbelievable. And then the fact that he stayed on the roster and flew with the team to Washington, D.C. before finally getting put on temporary leave by Major League Baseball. Yeah, all of it was just very surreal and bizarre. But to go into the ruling that you spoke of by the judge yesterday, and this is a Superior Court LA judge, lower level, who's dealing with these restraining order cases. Leading into that, Trevor Bauer's team, and it looked like his goal was to try to delay this hearing as long as they could. And I'm not sure if that was to try to just get him to the finish line of the MLB regular season, as far as be on paid leave for the remainder of the way, get your full contract that you're going to get paid anyway without having to pitch the entirety of the second half, and then hope that you can do the hearing after that, then MLB's investigation and the Pasadena Police Department's investigation. And if anything overlaps, or if there's anything, in the testimony that could harm him in any way in these other investigations, that hopefully he had delayed it. But the judge said, no, this is happening. And it was happening last week. There's no more delays. We're doing this now. And so to me, that was a indicator that, okay, she was a little fed up with his team and their tactics. And, that was good news for the accuser in that case. Now, as we go along, the accuser testifies for almost 10 hours over 3 days, long, grueling questions. Sorry about that.
All right.
Long, grueling questions where she gets hammered by both sides, especially Trevor Bauer's attorneys in this case. So, and then Trevor Bauer doesn't have to take the stand at all. He was only going to answer 2 questions: his name and he plays Major League Baseball as a pitcher. So that wasn't, and then plead the fifth for every other question he would have been asked. So the judge doesn't make him take the stand at all because of that. So everything that is the point I'm getting to, guys, here is that everything was leading, in my opinion, that the restraining order was going to be granted and extended for the full maximum 5 years. And even in the closing arguments, outside of the judge kind of interrupting the accuser's attorney's comments, where she kind of made it more personal, where she started to get into Trevor Bauer's past, where she started to call him a monster and get into those things and stray away from the facts of the case, and the facts that they had presented in this hearing on why the restraining order needed to be extended. I was still saying at that time, it looks like the judge is going to extend this. Then we went into the defense's closing arguments. Miss Holly, Trevor Bauer's attorney, Sean Holly's closing statements, and she was all over the place and veering from personal attacks to like slut shaming, as they say, against the accuser, to the past men she's been in relationships with, like Fernando Tatis and Mike Clevenger, another former Indian teammate of Trevor Bauers, who's now on the Padres. It was really kind of all over the place, going into her past as an alcoholic, not focusing on the things I thought she should be focusing on, which was, this is a domestic violence restraining order request. In order for that to be granted, you have to establish there's a relationship between Trevor Bauer and the accuser, and you have to prove that she is an imminent threat. Trevor Bauer is an imminent threat to the accuser as we speak, which is why the restraining order would have needed to be granted. Those are the 2 points that they can argue and win, but they didn't do it. And they went in this long closing argument that strayed and went everywhere. And I was like, oh my gosh, they're shooting Trevor Bauer's argument in the foot. Then the judge leaves for, it doesn't seem like 5 minutes. It doesn't seem like a couple minutes. And she was probably looking up something, I would imagine, some past case to cite or something. And she starts to come out and starts her statement and her ruling, I guess, by saying that there's enough there that you could reasonably say there was some sort of relationship. Again, leading me to believe she was going to extend this. Then, however, she gets into 2 important parts, which we'll talk about now. One, that the accuser omitted messages in her initial filing. These are the text messages that Sean Hawley and Trevor Bauer's defensive team really attacked the accuser on. That you showed all these text messages that show he did this to you, he was trying to help you and contact you, but you didn't show these other messages where he agreed not to contact you anymore, and he hasn't contacted you in over a month since you filed the restraining order. And so that was a big part of what the judge said. She believed that there was misleading information to why the original temporary restraining order was granted. And that's solely based on her saying that Trevor Bauer in that original filing was calling her incessantly, multiple times a day, every day, was texting her nonstop. And that just wasn't the case by the time she filed this ex parte at the end of June. It was actually, maybe he was doing it right after the incident happened at the end of May, but had not contacted her in over a month by the time this was filed. So the judge really hammered on that point. And then the second point, which I think, crazy to say, Trevor Bauer's team did a good job proving, which is if Trevor Bauer is violent or only does these things during sex, if he's rough, if he's, participating in BDSM or just rough, violent sex in the bedroom, he is only a threat to her in the bedroom. And if he has not contacted her now in many months and is planning on never seeing her again and never doing anything in the bedroom, then why would you need the restraining order against him? And so that's why the judge ruled to deny the extension. This is for fans out there and your listeners. This does not exonerate Trevor Bauer in any way. This does not mean he is innocent of the crimes that he was being accused of. All this means is that this particular judge did not see him as an immediate threat to her and to have a restraining order for 5 more years against him. She believed that Trevor Bauer would stay away from her, never contact her again, and never embark in a sexual relationship with her again. And that the original restraining order was misleading because he wasn't calling and texting her every day like she made it seem at the time. So that's where that is in the case. But, and I'm sure you'll ask about this next, there is that's not necessarily a legal precedent, but this is the first time a judge, an actual judge, has listened to the facts of the case, has listened to the testimony, and made a ruling. So to me, that is not quite a precedent, but it starts the ball rolling as far as what we could see happen when it comes to the Pasadena police investigation, a potential civil trial, MLB's potential investigation, and essentially Trevor Bauer's future in baseball.
Funny you should say that, Michael, because that was my next question. Because what specifically, based on everything that we know right now, everything that is basically been, based on everything we have right now, what is it that you genuinely believe that the MLB will do in this case? Punitive measures or something else?
Yeah, so this is interesting. I mean, I never really cared about what the ruling was going to be in this restraining order hearing when I was making predictions on previous shows, on television, on radio, even just talking to friends privately about what I think is going to happen. There are people who are like, can Trevor Bauer come back and be on the Dodgers rotation for the playoffs? No, I don't think you're going to see him pitch again this season. And I've been saying that since day one, since the day all this happened. That doesn't mean I don't think he'll ever pitch for the Dodgers again or in baseball again. I just don't think it'll be this season. So that's kind of where we're working from. And that will lead me to what I think MLB is going to do to answer your question, Nick. So the first thing first, this is going to drag out for the most of the season. The fact that this hearing concluded at this time is now going to put a little more pressure on the Pasadena Police Department to conclude their criminal investigation, which has been ongoing since May. So it's been a long time they've been investigating this. To me, this reminds me of the Deshaun Watson situation with the Houston Texans. They're still investigating that. And we now have 22 different women accusing him of anything from sexual harassment to inappropriate touching to assault, different things like that.
Yeah, it's another case that's basically escalated from when it first started.
Yeah. And he's actually still in training camp where, this was the optics that nobody liked. Just the fact that Trevor Bauer got in a plane with the Dodgers. He never took the mound again, but he was with the team, and that made everybody angry. And there was a possibility he would make his next start on the 4th of July in the nation's capital, and that made everybody angry. So, the possibility of Deshaun Watson starting a game for the Texans in a few weeks with this looming over his head is unimaginable. NFL needs to take a page from baseball. And I can't believe I'm saying that because that's usually rarely the case. They need to take a page from baseball and just put him on the commissioner's exempt list while they figure this out and while the investigation occurs. But to get back to where I was, I think this is going to put pressure on the Pasadena police to do a police investigation. My gut tells me they're probably not going to the prosecutor is not going to bring charges against him, which again is just going to lead to people thinking he's innocent here. And criminally speaking, it's going to help him, obviously. But I don't think all this is going to revolve around that one thing the judge talked about, which is what I said as far as setting the base, the formation, right? I don't want to use the word precedent because it's a legal word, but setting the groundwork in this case, where it comes to that little part of consent. And she spoke about it in her ruling. And I see you, Tom, nodding your head. So you remember this. She was saying that when we always talk about rape or sexual assault, when a woman is able to say no and not give her consent. But what if she says yes to some things, meaning sexual intercourse,
and was not expecting that,
rough play, slapping, choking, etc., but then she goes unconscious.
Yeah.
And now while she's unconscious, she's accusing Trevor Bauer of then punching her repeatedly in the face.
Right. That's what I was talking about with the weird ruling, because they were using the language of the limits.
Correct. And what they used was an admission of risk, basically assumption of risk, excuse me. That was the word she used. The assumption of risk in this instance is that if you have agreed and consented to having sex with somebody and it's going to be rough, I'm going to be choked, I'm going to be slapped, I'm going to be thrown around a little bit. There's an assumption of risk there that you're going to potentially end up with bruises, cuts, some of the things she ended up with. Now, her point is like, I didn't consent to getting punched in the face and having 2 black eyes. I didn't consent. And this is something I don't think was talked about enough during the hearing or proved, but she's claiming that there was anal sex while she was unconscious. Trevor Bauer's team is saying that's not the case. So that'll be interesting to see if that would come out in a criminal trial or a civil trial, and if she has the medical records to prove that or not. But she's saying what happened while I was unconscious was not consent. And California law, if you are unconscious, you're not able to withdraw your consent.
Yes.
You have to be conscious to do that. That's the law. And that is what is the criminal investigation by the Pasadena Police Department is hinging on. And to me, why it's taking so long is how can we prove that? Because right now, the only 2 people in the room are him and her. So who knows if she was truly unconscious when these things were happening or not, is him or her, is Trevor or the accuser. And that's going to be very difficult to prove or disprove in a court of law. And what I was told from sources was that, and this was a month ago, when it first started, that the Pasadena Police Department was really, they know those base facts right off the bat. What they were trying to do was dig deeper into her past sexual relationships, the fact that we've uncovered and discovered she was an alcoholic and has these one-offs with baseball athletes in the past, his past previous relationships, like we see this other Ohio restraining order ex parte that was filed in Ohio by another woman that Trevor Bauer was in a relationship with, who she claims he hit her and choked her during sex. So the police are trying to get as much evidence as they can, digging into both people's past here to see if they can develop a pattern that could help prove what we just talked about, that part of consent when she was unconscious. So to me, I don't think there's going to be enough to bring charges against him. So I believe that's going to then lead to the accuser suing him in civil court for financial damages in this. And she should, because that's the next step for her, at least. So that's what I think will happen next. MLB's investigation, I still think they're going to try to punt this as long as they can, waiting for something to happen in the Pasadena Police Department or even a civil case in here. If MLB feels the need to conclude their investigation before these other investigations, which I don't think they really need to at this point, but if they do, my guess, to go now back to your original question, Nick, is that at least a 30-game suspension is looming here. One thing that they can at least go to as a precedent for themselves that was revealed in this hearing is that Trevor Bauer is not denying that he did these things to this woman. He is denying, or contesting, I should say, whether or not it was truly consensual, whether or not she had asked or wanted this to happen, and just how severe the injuries actually are, and were they made worse by photos and other people talking about it, medication she was on, something they were claiming might have made the bruising worse, things like that. That should be enough for MLB to say, okay, we know you've done this. We now have this Ohio woman who filed something similar against you. Whether there are criminal charges or not, this is enough for us to suspend you for 30 games, which would be the rest of the regular season and the postseason. And let's see where we're at February spring training of 2021. The bigger question, or 2022, excuse me. The bigger question is going to be, what do the Dodgers end up doing once this is all wrapped up? And that, to me, is where things get messy.
Well, before we get to that, because we did want to touch base on that, I want to continue on a little bit about this ruling, well, potential ruling of whatever MLB's investigation is. Kind of two questions that I had in one. One of the first is, could there be a little more, scrutiny on Rob Manfred, depending on depending on whatever ends up here with the situation? And then part two of that, this isn't the first domestic violence case we've seen in MLB. I mean, obviously we've had some in past years, but just this year alone, Marcelo Zuna, Starlin Castro, and now we got this Trevor Bauer situation. Based on what we've seen in these past few years and this year, is there a domestic violence problem in Major League Baseball, and are MLB and the teams really doing enough?
It's a great question. You could argue there's a domestic violence problem in our society, in our country, and start there. These things shouldn't be happening. I feel like we're way behind the curve, but I feel like that women's rights is something that is getting better. The equal pay movement, mental health, paternity leave. I was just talking with one of my bosses at NBC just the other day. He took paternity leave, I think 16 years ago, and he got a week, and he's the father in this instance. And my boss now at NBC, our editor, he just got 4 months while we're working from home in a pandemic. So to see things have really changed as far as the leveling the playing field a little bit for men and women is a good thing to see. But domestic violence, you could argue, is still a problem in our society. And that as time goes on and the more equal we are, then hopefully that improves and gets better. And I think you could argue also that domestic violence could be a problem in sports more compared to other industries, because you're dealing with athletes who maybe don't have the resources or the ability to I don't know, get out their anger in other ways in these situations. And also maybe the women that they are involved with are women who are, enamored by these men, not just for their status as athletes or their fame, but also their money. And it could lead to, just more toxic situations and more toxic relationships. I don't really know, and I'm not an expert on that, but I would say it's not just a problem in baseball. It's a problem, across the country. And it's a problem definitely in lots of professional sports, because here in Los Angeles alone, I've had to cover many domestic violence cases, from NHL to the NBA to NFL to now Major League Baseball. And it's rampant in all of these places. And just a few years ago, we were asking that same question about the NFL. Does the NFL have a domestic violence problem? Hockey was having it. Does NHL have a problem? And now we're seeing it a little bit more in baseball. And the other thing with baseball is similar to basketball, but just way more players, because you're talking, a 40-man roster, 3 to 4 tiers of minor league rosters. Like, these are very deep teams where this can keep stemming. And baseball is growing so much internationally that you're bringing in all these other people from different cultures. Right now, what's going on in Afghanistan, as far as the way the Taliban, which will now rule that country, treats their women, is an example of how in different countries and different parts of the world, they don't necessarily think about women the way America does or the way other countries do. And so then when we bring all of them to America to play baseball, these kind of things happen because there's so many cultural and societal differences. And we saw that with some of the names that you named, Tom. So to go back to the question, though, I don't necessarily think it's a problem with MLB. I'm really glad that this domestic violence policy that Trevor Bauer is currently on administrative leave paid for exists, because this was the point of it, so that there wasn't bad optics, so that he wasn't playing on the Dodgers while we were waiting for this hearing. His this is a crazy time. I was at Dodger Stadium last night, Thursday night. That was originally supposed to be Trevor Bauer's bobblehead night.
Oh yeah.
And it got canceled. And I was sitting in the press box after the game going, I wonder where all those bobbleheads are. I wonder where those 40,000 Trevor bobbleheads are.
Didn't one of the, sorry to interrupt, but didn't either Castro or Ozuna, somebody was supposed to have a bobblehead night scheduled, and it ended up getting postponed because of something?
That was, I don't know. That might have been Castro, but Bowers was postponed after they knew this. They canceled it after the restraining order was filed, the ex parte. So it was canceled. So last night when the press box, I'm talking to some of my other colleagues in the sports journalist world and saying, where do you think these bobbleheads are? And we were making bets like, do we think they will ever see the light of day? Is this a situation where you could potentially scrap them? And if Trevor Bauer is still pitching in 2 years, in 2023, and people have forgotten somewhat about this, or he's gotten help, or he's tried to change his public image, you could bring him back? Or are these things being shipped off to Africa with the old Buffalo Bills Super Bowl shirts from, the late 90s? And is every child in those impoverished communities getting a Trevor Bauer bobblehead for Christmas going, who's this guy? You know what I mean? Like, we're speculating on what people are going to do with these things. And so it's just interesting how someone could fall from grace so quickly. And it wasn't like he was ever in the best light anyways. We know his past behaviors, which was why, to me, this wasn't that surprising when we heard about this. I was like, this man has showed you his true colors for many, many years on social media. And yes, that doesn't necessarily mean he's a criminal to that next level that he's being accused of, that we could just connect those dots. But when there is evidence of something, you shouldn't be surprised that there is, something like this from it. The last thing I'll say is, when it comes to baseball and what they need to do, and what the precedent has been and what it will be, this is what fans really need to kind of understand, because fans are always on emotional place. If we went with fans, nobody would be on the Dodgers roster right now, because at a given point throughout the season, they've wanted them all gone.
Yeah.
So right now, fans are believing that because the judge denied the restraining order extension to the 5 years, that makes Trevor Bauer innocent and he needs to be back on the team. And it's coming at a time when currently the Dodgers have like 2.5 starting pitchers. They have Walker Buehler, Max Scherzer, and whatever's left of David Price, who can't even get out of the 4th inning nowadays. So they need starting pitching help. And so fans, thinking just emotionally and just from a fan tunnel vision standpoint, are now saying, well, now this restraining order is over. There's been no charges filed against him. MLB, do what you're going to do and get this guy back on the field because we need him. And that's the last thing, in my opinion, MLB can do or should do. And to go to those past cases that you mentioned, Castro, Ozuna, you can even go back to Aroldis Chapman. You can go back to the other Ozuna on the Houston Astros. There's
Domingo
a lot of
Germán.
Yep. Germán is another great example. There's a lot of examples of this. And for us here in Los Angeles and on the Dodgers, the most recent example was Julio Urias, a man who was on the mound recording the last strike to win the World Series in 2020. He had been arrested for domestic violence at the Beverly Center here in Los Angeles and accused by a witness of hitting and striking his girlfriend at the time. The charges were ultimately dropped, and surveillance camera footage showed it was not what the witness said it was. It was more, they were arguing and she fell and he pushed her as part of like to get her away. It wasn't as violent as the witness made it out to be. So just so you know, he was on administrative leave that whole time. Once the police wrapped up their investigation, saw surveillance footage, dropped all the charges, then MLB, I believe, still suspended him. And I'd have to look this up, but I think it was 30 games. It could have been 20, but it was definitely, another lengthy suspension, even though the charges were dropped in this case. And he didn't go to court or have to do any of those things. So to me, that means that a suspension is coming for Bauer at some point, whether it does end up being this year or going into next year, it's coming.
Yeah. So wrapping this up, Michael, I do need to ask. We know, Trevor Bauer at this point has the highest AAV for a pitcher because I think it's like 117 million on a 3-year deal.
With the
102 under a 3-year deal. Yeah.
So how is it? You mentioned before about the restraining order ex parte that was in Ohio. So my question is, the Dodgers signed him to all this this exorbitant amount of money. A, how is it that they did not know about that before they had signed him? And B, does this mean that other MLB teams going forward need to be a little bit more thorough in their background checks, so to speak?
Yeah, that's a great question, Nick. And it is the question that needs to be asked right now. So going back 1 second, it was 20-game suspension for Julio Urias, not 30. Excuse me on that. But yes, he did get a suspension, a smaller one. And that's from what we've seen as far as the Ozuna and the Chapman suspensions and, even Castro's. That's the lower end of the spectrum. And we would expect reasonably that Trevor Bauer would be in that 20 to 30 game range once it happens, provided that, there's no criminal trial and all these other things where he could potentially found guilty and be in jail. That's not off the table yet, people. So as far as his contract is concerned and the Dodgers vetting process before they signed him, you're right. There was a memo that was released by Stan Kasten to employees during this 3 or 4 day hearing, 5-day hearing, actually, this last week. And he said in there, like, look, we don't condone Trevor Bauer's behavior. We as an organization has to yield to Major League Baseball to allow them to investigate this and, take the reins of the horse, so to speak, before then we can do anything and make our decisions. And he did say in that memo, they were unaware of the Ohio accusations of the woman and the restraining order being filed there. Now, to me, okay, it's fair. I believe him. But at the same time, if the Washington Post and their journalists can dig this up in about a month, and
you can't.
Why? Yeah, and you have a lot more money and power and influence than they do. Why couldn't you dig this up in a background check and a vetting process a lot quicker? I do know Nick, they did vet him. They did look back. They did look up the social media stuff. They did do their due diligence and had multiple conversations with him. What is your social media behavior going to be? You can't continue your conduct like this. You can't continue to stir controversy like this. Why were you doing it? And I can tell you that in those conversations, Trevor Bauer vowed to do better, vowed to not be that person anymore, not do those things. Maybe then he was expressing what he felt, and we were used to seeing publicly, privately in the bedroom with this victim and this accuser. But he was saying those things, and I guess the Dodgers naively believed him and didn't do a thorough enough vetting process to see. Now, let's also play devil's advocate for a second, Nick. Let's say they did see it, right? Let's say Trevor Bauer provided the same text messages he shared publicly on Twitter, where this woman drove hours to Cincinnati when he said, don't come, I don't want to see you, it's over. She does it anyway. She's trying to see him and doing all these crazy things and demanding hotels and all of this stuff. Let's say they saw all that. Let's say they saw that they were trying to extort him for $3 million or whatever the number was. And then let's say they see that she drops the extraining order and she drops trying to go further with this thing. I don't necessarily believe that one instance in which, in Trevor Bauer's case, does look like somebody who was a woman scorned and was trying to get money out of him once the relationship ended, would be something that they would adhere them from not signing him at the time, because it could have just been a one-off situation. Now, looking at it in hindsight, this is potentially a pattern of behavior. At the very least, it is a pattern of behavior that he has horrible taste in choosing the women he chooses to date or embark in a sexual relationship. It is a testament to his poor judgment in that. And I also don't think it's a coincidence he picks the type of women he does. And without, criticizing these accusers and stuff, but, they would probably self-proclaim, say they've had a tumultuous past, they're damaged, they've been through a lot. And maybe they're a little more vulnerable and untrusting. And maybe Trevor Bauer believes these are the perfect targets for him to be in these type of relationships where it's going to be violent or rough, sexually speaking. But to go back to your point, Nick, even if they had known about this particular one, as Trevor Bauer finally came public to speak about it and denounce it and be like, this woman tried to extort me, and then show the receipts for it in some of those text messages, I don't necessarily know if that would have stopped the Dodgers cold now. And then again, once the season began, this new accuser came up. So had they had both and been able to see that pattern, probably at that point you would hope that they would not sign him. But now we go to the contract, which, as you said, he has that highest AAV in the league, but the Dodgers right now, Trevor Bauer has a player option at the end of this season. And then he would lock in to a $32 million salary. That's what the cap hit would be for the Dodgers next season. There's no way in, can I say hell? I can say hell. There's no way in hell that Trevor Bauer is, in my opinion, opting out unless he's going to retire, because I don't think a team will touch him with a 10-foot pole. And there is no way he's going to get anything close to $32 million in free agency if he is to opt out. So he's opting in. Now that puts the Ionis on pressure on the Dodgers to say, are we going to cut this guy and release him and pay him $64 million over 2 years?
I was just going to ask, are they going to, could they maybe try to void it, put some ethical or moral clause, say, hey, he's done all this, we don't want to have to pay him so much money?
Is there even a precedent for that?
Yeah, there is. There are moral clauses in contracts, and I don't have the specific details of this contract. It was not made public. I haven't viewed or read the contract, but a moral clause is pretty standard. Now, do accusations break the moral clause? No. So my understanding would be, as of right this second, accusations against him, a temporary restraining order ex parte filed and granted, and then the extension of that restraining order in a hearing denied. So as of this second, I don't believe he's breached a moral clause the way I understand most moral clauses in Major League Baseball contracts. What the Dodgers would be hoping is that the Pasadena Police Department arrests him and the prosecutor files charges against him for sexual assault, rape, whatever it may be, and it goes to trial. Even if he was found innocent at a trial by jury in a criminal case, that alone could be enough to void the contract. But if that doesn't happen and it's just a civil case and an MLB investigation, I don't think there's enough to void the contract. And we're right back in that situation where it's not just cutting him and eating $32 million, which would be his number in 2022. I think they would take that hit. It is $64 million over 2 years, including another 7 in signing bonuses that he's due. So you're talking $71 million minimum right there that you have to eat in order for this man to not pitch for you or play for you anymore. And that's what fans don't understand, when it's not just a simple cut the guy, release him. Yeah, if he was Starling Castro and making Starling Castro money, that's a no-brainer decision. But like you said, Nick, he's making the highest AAV in the entire league. So you're cutting not just the highest paid player in the league per year, but a guy you're on the hook for 2 years plus more money. My thought would be, if it plays out the way we just discussed in those earlier questions you asked, would be the Dodgers are going to hope and pray that the news cycle kind of changes, and similar to the way Aroldis Chapman was when he came back to the Yankees after his charges and his suspension, what Ozuna's doing with the Astros, at some point fans won't forgive and they won't necessarily forget, but they'll move forward. And I have a funny feeling you will see Trevor Bauer, if that is the case, pitch for the Dodgers again at some point, after he has atoned and tried to get help and tried to do everything he can publicly to fix his edge.
It is a case that is just escalated since, was first discovered, and it's just going to continue to escalate, and it's going to be quite interesting to watch. Again, Michael Duarte, NBC in LA, covering all the sports teams here, has been following this and reporting on this Trevor Bauer case, doing an excellent job. Michael, thank you so much for coming on. Great answers, great discussion. Thank you again.
Absolute pleasure.
You're welcome. You guys too. Anytime.